How is it rocking, Dween Nation? Stay here because we are just about to get underway. In the meantime, please like, comment, and subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. We put out weekly sports content, and we want to continue to build up Dween Nation and the brand that is Dween Sports. Thank you all, and enjoy. Welcome in, Dween Nation. This is your host, Justin Paez, alongside Genoa Agudelo, and we just completed part one of week 3 fantasy reactions, fantasy recap of, that was the first 8. This is the next 8. So if you were interested and you wanted to listen to the coverage of Washington, Cincinnati, Jacksonville, Buffalo, New England, and New York Jets, New York Giants in Cleveland, Green Bay and Tennessee, Chicago and Indy, Houston and Minnesota, or Philadelphia and New Orleans, check out part 1 and then come back here or do vice versa. And because we're going to jump into this part 2 thing. But before we do, Jano, how you doing?
Yo, Dween Nation. I'm so excited, Justin. I'm excited to finish week 3 recap. What a pretty crazy week here, Justin.
Crazy.
There's a 3 o'clock game that happened in Vegas that has us really confused. But that's just how unpredictable. It just tells you how unpredictable this league is. There's no other league like this. Obviously, we all have our own love for NBA and MLB, but with football, it's just stuff like that. You don't expect Andy Dalton to go out there to have a great game. So very excited to get into these games there, Justin. And it's good to see you, my brother. And it's good to go along the season. It's been so much fun covering each game, talking about our waiver wire pickups, talking about fantasy. So I'm doing great, Justin. It's good to do part 2 today.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some major upsets. I thought week 2 had the upsets, filled out through it, but this week, tops that. I mean, this is my worst week in game picks that I've ever had. I think I only had 6 correct picks this week. I picked some upsets that didn't happen, but I did pick the Panthers winning. So I'm going to count that as a win this week, even though that was only one of my 6 total out of the 16. So very tough week, but we're going to jump into this coverage here. And we're going to start with the Chargers at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Justin Herbert did leave the game injured, re-aggravated his ankle sprain. So worries there for next week. They play the Chiefs at home, I believe. So if he's out, you kind of have to downgrade most of the offense. And I mean, like, you might have to start Dobbins just because he's getting the volume. His volume has jumped. Now I believe he had 65% of touches in week 3. So it's gone from under 50 to right around 50 to now over 50, over 60. So JK's looking like he's taken over that backfield. Even though it wasn't a great game against Pittsburgh, but that's a tough matchup. Now he goes against Kansas City, which is also another tough matchup. And if Herbie's not there, you might have to start him, but it might be just uglier to watch. But Dobbins might be getting like every touch because they're not going to want to rely on Taylor Heineke to win them this game. But yeah, so with that game, in that game of itself, we saw Quinn Johnson score another touchdown. So maybe he's kind of becoming more of a consistent piece in the red zone, which is very important, especially, he's not getting a bunch of targets, but hey, if you're getting targeted near the red zone, maybe it's like a good DFS play, like a cheap guy that, hey, 1 week he might get 1 catch for 8 yards, but hey, next week he might get 4 for 80 and a touchdown kind of thing. So QJ gets another touchdown. Gus Edwards looks awful. I'd probably keep him on my roster, but it's getting close to the OUT moment. And then with the Pittsburgh, the running backs now there's a question. Jaylen Warren leaves the game injured, so he might miss some time. But then you're thinking, well, okay, Najee Harris, RB1 season, about to come back in. Najee Harris spotted in a sling today. So there's worries across the board for the Pittsburgh running backs. We might see a Cordero Patterson step in. I know Arthur Smith and him have the history in Atlanta. So that's an interesting thing that we need to stay in touch with. Maybe a good waiver wire guy just to scoop up and hold. And then, if it doesn't work out and Najee plays, you can cut him. Or if it's not the case, boom, you got a starter for the week. I did that with Cam Akers last week, right when I heard, I believe on Wednesday, hey, Joe Mixon, Damian Pierce didn't practice. I picked up Cam Akers. He had 9.9, so it wasn't like a phenomenal game or anything. But I started him over Dobbins actually, and he did better than Dobbins. So you never know. Just got to be a proactive, coach in your fantasy leagues. And then as for the wide receivers and Justin Fields, I mean, Pickens didn't have a great game, and I think it's going to be just a tough season for them to kind of find out find a consistent piece. And they're winning these games too, where they're it's slow and the defense is carrying. And I think that's how it's going to be most of this season. Fields kind of had a solid fantasy day. Not really. Actually, 245, a pick and a touchdown. So, but they're just winning games. So I think Fields will continue to start. But yeah, I think same story going for Pittsburgh going forward. With the Chargers, they got another tough matchup, and if Herbie's out, I'm gonna not start any Chargers wide receivers, but I'm still probably starting Dobbins.
Yeah, Justin, in the battle of Justins here in Pittsburgh, it was quite the interesting matchup. A little underwhelming there from the Chargers side. I expected them just to go out there and play a little bit more, but you know Herbert did get hurt there. But the Steelers, they're for real, Justin. They're for real. This defense is probably right now one of the best defenses in the league, if not the best. They have all the experience in the world, led by Mike Tomlin. He is, you can make the argument that he is now solidifying himself one of top 10 head coaches there of all time. He's been there for about almost 20 years, and he's led the Steelers, year in and year out to some pretty solid teams. Even after the big AB drama and Big Ben, but I'm liking what I've seen out of Fields here. I do believe that he is the future quarterback for the Steelers. I believe if they were to make a playoff or possibly even win the division with how Baltimore's struggling, how Cincinnati is struggling, and as Cleveland is struggling, this is the Steelers' division to win. And if they were to win, Justin Fields no doubt deserves a max contract to be the franchise quarterback for these Pittsburgh Steelers. I think him and Mike Tomlin are a great quarterback, a head coach duo there. Mike Tomlin is still relatively young there compared to other head coaches across the NFL. Obviously, there's the LaFleurs and the McVays and the D'Amico Ryans of the world who are also young. But Mike Tomlin is still a veteran, but he's very young. He's not Pete Carroll age or Bill Belichick age or anything like that. I think he might be younger than Mike McCarthy. But with this, the Steelers offense only going to do just enough. We did get a breakout game from Calvin Austin, who they've kind of been hiding there in the back for the last year or so. And so that's kind of going to be a thing. I do think Fields is going to get better as the season goes along. No matter who the running back is. Looking at the Chargers, it's very surprising to see Quinton Johnson now becoming the guy that they always thought he would, drafting him out of TCU in last year's draft or in 2023. And so Herbert now has some good targets to throw to, and so we'll see what they can do there. I'm kind of hoping that this, Chargers offense can kind of get it together. They do have now some pretty decent pass catchers there, along with Lad McConkey there. They just need a tight end. They're just a tight end away from being a pretty good offense. So I think they might be looking to add next year's draft. So the Chargers, they're gonna be this underwhelming team all year. Gonna need to rely on Justin Herbert. If he's hurt, they're not going to really win any games there. So if you know Easton Stick or Taylor Heineke were to play next week, I would fire up that Chiefs defense there because that's who they're going to be playing next week in SoFi. But very impressed with the Steelers. But I do have them on upset alert next week in Indianapolis. So just be unaware for that.
All right, I think that's interesting. I mean, with one more thing with the Chargers, I think there's a really good chance he sits against Kansas City, even though it's a division matchup, because they do have a Week 5 bye. So why throw Herbert into a situation like? I mean, I'm surprised they honestly did it this past week. He already had an ankle sprain, and then they threw him out there, and now he re-aggravated, and now it's worse. So I see them if they want to be smart and make that playoff run. Hey, hold it off. You probably will lose to Kansas City. You were probably going to lose to Kansas City anyway. So hold off there, and then with Pittsburgh, I think all of their games are going to be like how they've been. Slow, ugly, defensive oriented, and honestly, I mean, you said that they're on upset alert next week in Indianapolis. But just say they pull that off, Anthony Richardson struggles more. I think they could honestly win their next 4 or 5 games. I mean, they host Dallas, who's been really bad on the road and starting out 1-2. At the Raiders, Raiders are either really good or really really bad. The Jets at home, the Giants at home, and the Commanders on the road. I mean, before they jump into 4 straight division matchups. They actually really after that game they have a really tough stretch, but if they could go somehow go like 8-0, they're going to be in a good line to win the division, as you mentioned with the rest of the team struggling. So moving to the next game, we had honestly the to me the biggest upset of the week, which was Denver whooping Tampa Bay 26-7. We saw Bo Nix. He doesn't throw a touchdown. He runs one in, but he looked really good in the pocket. Made plays. They kept the ball, and they were rolling. I mean, they dominated. I had 5 more minutes time of possession. Tampa Bay, poor Baker Mayfield. That offensive line is really bad in Tampa Bay. He was getting sacked and pressured at all points against the Denver defense. So, and we even saw it, even though Tampa Bay pulled it off against Detroit last week. That offensive line is tough, and Detroit was getting to him in the backfield. And I think it's going to be a story all season. Hopefully, Baker Mayfield stays intact, no injuries. But there's definitely concern there with how he didn't have time, and I honestly I don't blame him too much. I don't think he played like a really bad game. He just had a tough go of it. He was getting pressured all the time, and that reverberated on everybody else. Really, I mean, Evans only had 2 for 17. Godwin did get in the end zone, so he had a good day or salvaged a good day. Rashad White, another bad game. I mean, 5 catches for under 20 yards, only 6 carries for 17. But we saw Bucky Irving, 9 for 70. So hey, I mean, you were talking about it, I believe, last episode on how Bucky Irving, hey, you could throw him in your lineups. Definitely over a guy like DeAndre Swift. Because he's looking like the guy. Todd Bowles even came out and said, "Hey, he's earned the opportunity to get more touches." So Bucky Irving's got an interesting little opportunity there to become a solid and consistent piece for fantasy lineups. And then with Tampa Bay, with Baker Mayfield, they play Philly, so you could argue is a good matchup, even though Philly played tough this week. But we'll see in that.
Yeah, Justin, this matchup had me upset all, week long there. I just feel that, first of all, with the Tampa Bay, running backs there, what is going on there? Bucky Irving is leading there in carries. He had 9 carries for 70 yards. And Rashad White, a guy that was sensational, last year, only has 6 carries for only 17 yards. He gets his catches, out of the backfield. Um, and, it's only 5 catches for 18 yards. Mike Evans is a quiet day. Obviously, Godwin scores a touchdown, but even it's a quiet day for him as well. I'm always going to say this Baker, not the biggest fan of the guy, but I do think that Denver was just able to get, Denver's D line was able to just pressure that offensive line. And, it's very frustrating if you're a Buccaneers fan. This was such a frustrating match because I know I had started Buccaneers defense in 2 of my leagues. Very frustrating for them to only give me 1 point there. Only a fumble recovery. I think they got. I don't even think there was no sacks on Bo Nix. Meanwhile, I think Baker was sacked 7 times. So that's the story of the game right there. Cortland Sutton. 7 catches for 68 yards. That's the leading player in receiving for the Broncos. And the rushing there for Denver. Obviously, a couple years ago, Javonte Williams was the story of the year. Tears his ACL, and he had some good games and off games, kind of returning there last year. And it's just, there's no rushing game going on there. There's a guy by the name of Tyler Beatty maybe, and he, kind of led there in rushing yards, and maybe that was just because the game was out of reach. But he did have a game long 43-yard rush. And so I'm raising eyebrows there. And you know what, Justin, I'm gonna have to use your phrase here. If I don't see anything from Javonte Williams, next week in New York, I'm OUT there. He's been very inconsistent. Obviously, yes, he had a bad injury 2 years ago, but so did Brees Hall, and he's still doing great. He's back doing great, looking phenomenal. But Javonte Williams, I'm OUT there if he's not doing good. Next week he only had 5 rushes for 12 yards, and I feel like in a win like that, you kind of want to feed him more. He only has 52 rushing yards on the year, absolutely just despicable. So you know, both teams disappointed me here. Even though the Broncos won, it still made me mad to watch this matchup. This is probably one of the uglier matchups in the year, and hope to not have it all year for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree with that sentiment. It's like there was nobody on Denver that even in a game where they won and dominated that had like a fantasy like coming out party where like, hey, we got to pick him up, we got to start him. Like the running backs underperformed with actually I just looked it up. It's Tyler Bidet. I don't really see how that's possible in the pronunciation, but Tyler Bidet is the leading running back, the guy that actually looked good. And it's really a sad day that I Javonte Williams. I mean, I've been high on him since he came out of UNC, and he looked good rookie year and got injured, and now I thought 2 years removed, it's got to be there's got to be a change, got to be a flip switch. Sean Payton has a history with running backs, and it's looked really bad. As you mentioned, only 52 rushing yards on the season. Gosh, I don't want to say I'm out, and that's more of like a personal bias, but I think if I didn't have this like personal gut feeling that I thought he was going to be a good running back, I would be out already. OUT, but I'll carry that same sentiment. If it's not happening this week, gosh, it's gonna be I got to be out. I mean, hopefully, because like you would even think in a situation where Denver is up by double digit points, like hey, that's Javonte's city, like that should be running. They should be running it with him, and he just didn't look good. I mean, 2 yards a carry. Come on, man. But yeah, maybe I don't think anything's gonna change there. So it might be smart to kind of look for a new owner for Javonte Williams. Unfortunately, I mean, Genoa knows. I already tried to offer him a trade today with Javonte in it. He didn't want it, which kind of hurts my feelings. No, but anyway, um, moving to the next game. We have Carolina upsetting oh my god, Oakland, Las Vegas on the road. My only redeemable pick from this week's game picks. I had Carolina upsetting the Raiders and Andy Dalton. Wow, I think are we in line for a Joe Flacco kind of resurgence on a season? Old man comes in, takes over and is phenomenal. I mean, I unfortunately I really think Dave Canales was like, he is the quarterback whisperer, and he was whispering, he was like, Bryce Young's just not good. Like that's what happened. He's like, he's just not good. I'm gonna throw in this other guy who's done it in other places, and Andy Dalton showed it. I mean, and it helped everybody. Chuba Hubbard had a big game. Deontay Johnson had a big game. Thielen, he scored a touchdown, got injured on it, supposed to miss time, but maybe that leaves some openings for Xavier Leggett to step in, have a little rookie breakout moment. But with Andy Dalton, it completely switches up my thoughts on this Carolina Panthers offense and team in entirety. Um, if it was similar to how the last 2 weeks went, I was about to be OUT on Deontay Johnson, my guy of all people at wide receiver. But hey, if Andy Dalton's in that starting lineup, Deontay Johnson jumps right back up to where I thought he'd be, before the season started. So Andy Dalton, surprise, surprise. I'm happy that this happened because I'm tired of watching crap football. Even though there was a lot of crappy football to go around this week, but the Panthers were not one of those teams. But on the flip side, the Raiders were one of those teams. Gardner Minshew had a bad game. Uh, Antonio Pierce was talking about people who had made business decisions, I guess, to not try, which is really tough. I wonder who he's insinuating. Could be a Devonte Adams or something. I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at who did bad last week or in this game. Zamir White 10 for 34. OUT. I said it last week. Hey, this guy doesn't perform this week. I'm out. I'm out, brother. Like it's not good. You know, and Madison gets the touchdown again. So honestly, Madison's the running back to have. Not that I like Madison in any sense of the word in fantasy, but he did get the touchdown. Poor Brock Bowers doesn't have a good game. I'm not too worried about him. I think he will still be involved heavily. And the two people that actually had good games, Trey Tucker and Jacoby Myers. Um, I don't trust either of them going forward, regardless. Like even though they had a good game, unless something happens where hey, Devonte Adams was the guy that was making business decisions and they suspend him or bench him or something, then maybe Jacoby Myers deserves a start. But right now, I think he's fine from afar. I'll keep watching and see if there's any more consistency coming from those those players.
Yeah, Justin, I think out of the whole, week 3, I think this might be one of the biggest stories. This matchup, it's unbelievable that the Panthers and the Raiders kind of dominate storylines there. Kind of looking through all these matchups through week 3, and there's so much to get into. One, I just want to talk about the Raiders. This is, I'm not sure if Carolina looked very dominant or if this is just a collapse by the Raiders where there's something going there internally. Obviously, they, scraped out a come from behind win last week in Baltimore. So I'm not sure if that was Baltimore struggling or, it's just a lot of questions there on, the testament of all teams here. But here with the Raiders, I really, I'm not the guy that, loves juicy gossip or I'm not the, tell me more kind of guy. But with what Antonio Pierce said in his conference, I gotta know who he's talking about. Looking at the stats here, looking at, first of all, let's look through potential suspects here. Let's start off with Minshew. He had a decent-ish game. Got sacked twice, 18 for 28, 214 yards, a TD and a pick. Maybe it was his inability to move the football. Okay, maybe it's Minshew. Going into the running backs here, maybe it's Zamir White. That could be a guy that Pierce is looking at. He hasn't been good at all this year. He was pretty good back half of last year, but Madison has scored 3 straight weeks. And so that's got to be some question there. Okay, maybe you said it's Devontae Adams, and it could be Justin because 3 people led. There's 3 people that led over Devontae Adams this year or this week, and it's Trey Tucker who had 7 catches, 96 yards, and a touchdown. I think it might have been garbage time. Also, Jacoby Myers, who I like going into this year. I was surprised that he wasn't on enough draft boards. He's pretty solid as they come with 7 catches as well, 62 yards and a score. Obviously the rookie Brock Bowers, who's off to a pretty fairly good start among tight ends. He only had 3 catches for 41. Then it's Devontae Adams there, only 4 catches and 40 yards. Obviously, going into the season, there was a lot of talk, chatter, rumors, reports that, maybe Devontae Adams wanted out. Maybe potentially he wanted to join his, former teammate and future Hall of Fame quarterback Aaron Rodgers in New York. Maybe there was some other rumblings. Maybe he could have been traded for Ayuk, or maybe he could have, whatever. And so that might be something there that, Antonio Pierce is heading, or maybe the defense, where we didn't see much from Max Crosby. Obviously, he didn't have a sack, only had 3 tackles, 1 solo. He is kind of the leader of that defense. Or maybe he could just be talking about somebody else. So, very concerning if you're the Raiders. They go to Cleveland next week, so they should be able to get or they're home with Cleveland, actually. They should be able to get their get back, obviously, with Deshaun Watson struggling. And for those in Dween Nation, we did talk about the Browns in previous episodes, so go ahead and check it out. But going into the Panthers side real quick before we get to the next matchup, very impressive for Andy Dalton there. 36 for 37, 319 and 3 touchdowns there. Chuba Hubbard had a great game. He had 114 yards rushing and a score through a catch off the air. And so this Panthers offense looks to be trending the right direction. And you mentioned that, yeah, Thielen got hurt and he might miss next week. So Xavier Legette, who did get 3 targets, only 42 catches or 42 yards with 2 catches, maybe he can be the guy that takes the next step. A guy that you love this year, Deontay Johnson, had a great game. He had this catch for 35 yards, which I thought he was going to score. It was a very nice play. Was able to shake out 3 or 4 defenders and get it out of bounds. I think that was before halftime, I believe. So Deontay Johnson is a guy that you can now start now with Andy Dalton at quarterback. And next week of the matchup against, Andy Dalton's former team, a team that he spent 9 years with, you know, doing everything he could to win a playoff game, and that led to them being bad, and then drafting Joe Burrow. So that's a storyline going into next week. That Andy Dalton was the reason why they kind of got Joe Burrow, and so they all kind of circle around, and then they meet next week in Carolina. What could be a potential shootout. And, the Bengals need to win. The Panthers need another victory. And hey, Justin, this division is open for grabs. Atlanta lost against Kansas City. The Saints look hot. Now they might be dwindling down. And the Buccaneers, they lost to Denver and they struggled. So the Panthers are very much in it to win their division.
I think that's a great point you make. They're one game out. I know it's 3 weeks, but they're one game out from number 1 in the division, which is crazy. Moving to the next game, one of the 2 undefeated NFC teams continues winning. And the Seattle Seahawks, they dominate the Dolphins 24-3. Geno, even though he had 2 picks, he looked pretty good. Zach Charbonnet looked phenomenal. 91 yards, 2 touchdowns, 16 yards receiving. DK Metcalf had a huge touchdown. I think it was 56 yards and a score. Those are the 3 names that do anything in this game. Unfortunately, JSN did not have a game that we expected. Noah Fant got some targets, which is maybe something to just keep your eye on. Nothing to pick up yet, but if he has another game where he's getting, 6 targets, 6 catches, I'd be interested, especially with how bad tight ends have been this year. And then Miami. Uh-oh. Skylar Thompson looked really darn bad, and then they put in Tim Boyle, and I was like, oh no. I mean, I hopefully Skylar Thompson's okay, no injuries there, but hey, Miami, just go and pick up Ryan Tannehill. Go ahead and pick up, trade for Russell Wilson or Jameis Winston or something. Like, this is not good, and if you ride it out, because I expect obviously Tua has to miss 3 more games. And who knows, he might miss another game. Like, you never know if he's going to be ready. You can't wait 4 weeks. Your season's going to be over in 4 weeks if you wait that long. And they look really bad. They have a bye week, I believe, in week 6. Yeah, in week 6. But next week they host Tennessee, so that actually is a winnable game. Then they play at New England, at Indianapolis, and home against Arizona. They could lose all of those games. I think they have the capabilities to lose all of those games. But yeah, it's just everybody didn't do anything. I mean, Devon Achane unfortunately had an underwhelming game, and he was the highlight out of Miami players. Tyreek Hill only 40 yards on 3 catches. Jalen Waddle 4 catches, 26 yards. What are your thoughts with the current state of the Miami Dolphins?
Yeah, Justin, this message goes out to the Dolphins GM, Chris Grier, okay? There's a guy, we just talked about this matchup in Carolina. There's a guy, and I know they're not willing to sell low yet, but hey, they just won a football game without their former number 1 pick overall, and I'm talking about Bryce Young. You're going to need to pick up the phone and call Carolina. Let's make a deal. Let's get Bryce Young over here, and let's see what we got. Obviously, you mentioned Tua has to miss the next 3 games. Justin, the Bills are on fire. They beat you in week 2. You're going to face them again at some point this year. Why not bring in a quarterback to get him, some snaps, some reps, some games until, you're going to have to play Buffalo. Let's see. They're going to have to play Buffalo let's see, thinking 7, I believe. It's week
Yeah,
4,
week
5,
3,
6, 7,
4,
8. Week 8. Why don't we trade in for a guy? Tua at that point is going to be ready to go, but are we really going to bring Tua back to play against the team that he got injured versus? I just don't think that's the best idea to even bring Tua back at all this season. Possibly week 14 or 15, but by then, Justin, the season could be over for the Dolphins. They have an absolutely talented offense. Tyreek Hill, Waddle. I love Jonnu Smith. He's getting his looks. Obviously, we love the running backs with Achane, Mostert, even Jalen Wright shows some promise. They have a pretty great offense, Justin. Literally can get the ball to any. They just need the quarterback. They need a high pocket passer. Maybe it's not Bryce Young, but if it's not Bryce Young, you can always pull a trade in for a, you know, you mentioned Ryan Tannehill. He's been sitting for a while, but maybe a guy like Jameis Winston who can get the ball with his arm. He has a great arm. And there's so many other quarterbacks you can go to. But Justin, I just do not think that, yes, looks bad. The injury that Skylar Thompson did have, he was out for a while. I think it was a chest injury. He might have broken something, maybe through his chest or his ribs. I'm not 100% sure what the injury was. I just don't think he plays next week, Justin. So that leaves Tim Boyle, who is 29 years old, been in the NFL for 6 years. If he's not good then, he probably won't be good now. And Justin, here's another question: is how is he going to get the ball to guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and even throwing out of the backfield to Devon Achane, who's been so great being a pass catcher as a running back and putting points there all over in fantasy wise, and it's going to affect Achane's value as well. I do think they have Tyler Huntley as well, who had some good couple seasons there, filling in for Lamar when he was hurt in Baltimore. So maybe they should go to a guy like Tyler Huntley, who poses some running threats there. He is a great runner there, like I mentioned. He had some good games. I think he played for last year 1 game when Baltimore had secured their number 1 seed. The year before, were back-to-back years, Lamar missed a lot of time in the middle of those years. Huntley kind of stepped in, showed that he was a pretty reliable, capable quarterback, can use his legs. And I feel like he's the guy that you might have to go with right now, Justin. Obviously, I'd love for them to, trade for Bryce Young, but then that kind of raises some concerns for the future of Tua, and I think they kind of don't want to do that. But even a guy like Russell Wilson, a guy that probably won't be in the league next year, we're not sure what we're going to get, what the future is for Russell Wilson. The guy in Pittsburgh is Justin Fields. Why not call Pittsburgh? Let's make a trade. You don't have to give too much up for Russell Wilson. I feel like Pittsburgh kind of wants Russell Wilson out of the door just because they feel like they have something with Fields at 3-0. So go ahead and get Russell Wilson here. He is capable to get the football to guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. I'm very confident in Russell Wilson and Mike McDaniels to kind of form a relationship there. Tua and Russell Wilson are similar players, just they have different hand styles. Tua's obviously left-handed, as well as Russell's right-handed. That's pretty much the difference. Russell Wilson doesn't have that same escapability as he did his first couple of years in the league with Seattle, but I do think he fits this team the best. So hey, I think that he can fit with this team.
I think it's interesting. I think it's an interesting idea. I mean, I was just looking while you were talking, like what other free agent quarterbacks are there, and it's pretty desolate. There's not a lot besides Tannehill. Like, I mean, I think one that you could maybe argue, like PJ Walker had flashes with Carolina, but yeah, I think you should maybe look to the trade market. Like, I wouldn't worry if like you don't want to just sell your season, man. And I think Miami's at a point where they're like, I think in the, like they're deep within them. They think, hey, we really need to get another quarterback. I know he's solid. He's a solid quarterback, but he's got the injury concern. But I feel like they're not going to do that because I feel like if they draft somebody or trade for a guy that could be their franchise quarterback, that it would like rub Tua the wrong way or
Yeah,
hurt the fan base. So I'm interested if they're just going to ride it out, but I hope they don't. For fantasy football's sake. Moving to the next game, Baltimore beats Dallas on the road. For most of this game, it was like 28-6 for most of this game. It was just like a nothing for Dallas. They turn it up in the fourth quarter, score 19, make it close. But Baltimore wins, and they win with Derrick Henry predominantly. 150 yards, 2 scores. I was very high on Derrick Henry heading into this week. We've seen through 2 weeks how Dallas has struggled against the run with Jerome Ford having a top 10 performance and then Kamara obviously having the 4 touchdown game. So it seemed like Derrick Henry was in line for a big game, and he does it. He has a phenomenal game. Let me see what he was. He was what RB?
one should have been
Was
one,
he RB
right?
one on the week? He was RB
Maybe him
two.
and Kyron
Him and
might have been.
Saquon. Saquon
Oh,
is RB1 on the week, then Derrick Henry. Um, so Derrick Henry, big game. I think that's the story for Derrick Henry all season. He's going to be getting his touchdowns. Excuse me. And yeah, he's a great play every week. So no, not much more there. Zay Flowers is an underwhelming game, as well as Mark Andrews with goose egg. Mark Andrews, worried. I can't say I'm out, but if I have him, I'd be looking to sell him, even though you can only sell him for pretty cheap right now. There's worries there. Even Likely had a really bad game. I believe he had one catch, 1 for 4. So nobody in the Baltimore receivers did anything, and I think it was mainly due to scheme. I think Baltimore knew that Dallas struggled against the run, and so they just hammered that home, and it worked out for them. So like I'm not too concerned for Zay Flowers, but for Mark Andrews, who hasn't had a good game yet, there is worries there. And then on the Dallas side, CeeDee Lamb kind of struggles. He fumbles. So I'm not worried per se. I think he's in that similar boat with Brandon Ayuk, which is I think the next game we'll talk about. Them not having a training camp has affected their start to the season, and they struggled thus far. And then we saw Ferguson come back from injury. I thought they might ease him in, but hey, he hit the ground running, had a phenomenal game, 6 for 95. And as a tight end these days, that'll do it for you. I mean, he was tight end 3 on the week, without scoring a touchdown. So Ferguson, if you have him, be super happy. I think he's going to be a lock-in tight end every week, going forward. Especially, I mean, CeeDee Lamb's going to continue to get more and more involved, but I think Ferguson's going to become one of the more consistent pieces. And then the running backs, again, it's a pretty mixed bag. Rico Dowdle clearly leads the backfield at 8 carries to Zeke's 3 to Deuce Vaughn's 2. And I think Rico Dowdle, I think in a game where they actually have a lead or at least it's competitive, I think Rico might be the guy to rely on. And I'm not saying, I mean, I think he's worth a pickup in your fantasy leagues. Not saying he's worth a start, especially on a short week, but it's not a horrible matchup against the Giants. Um, so yeah, I think he might be worth a pickup. I think he might be that Dallas Cowboys RB to look out for, even though it is pretty ugly.
Yeah, Justin, this was a semi-ugly game there in Dallas. One thing that was really ugly was to see a guy like CeeDee Lamb kind of get into it with his quarterback there, kind of in the mid of the second half. There's some issues going on in Dallas, and I feel like both teams are kind of having a similar problem, which I kind of figured would happen, and that is the lack of pass catchers. Obviously, with Dallas, they have a sensational pass catcher with CeeDee Lamb, a guy that they paid, with Jake Ferguson, who's a great tight end. But Baltimore, on the other hand, doesn't have a guy that's like CeeDee Lamb. But with Dallas, it's more like they need to add a guy around CeeDee Lamb because he's going to be getting, defense, all of the defense's best, to be honest, because defenses aren't scared of Kayvon Turpin and Tolbert, who both scored touchdowns, but defenses aren't, you know, game plan for that all week. It's how to stop CeeDee Lamb, and I feel like Baltimore was cool enough seeing Kayvon and Jalen Tolbert score. As long as CeeDee Lamb doesn't get them going, and they as long as they had that lead late in the fourth quarter, they can just keep it. If CeeDee Lamb was on fire all game, maybe they probably wouldn't have kept up with this. It was kind of like playing chess to their checkers. But Baltimore has this issue where they have a sensational tight end, but there's nobody around to kind of stop, like kind of get him separation. And that's why we see a guy like Mark Andrews, go goose egg here. A lot of defenses are forcing, Lamar to beat them with other receivers. No one's scared of Nelson Aguilar, who led them in receiving yards with 56 for the week, or a guy like Charlie Kolar, who we've never heard of, Rashad Bateman, who John Harbaugh was talking about all preseason and all offseason, and we still have yet to really hear from him. And Derrick Henry and Lamar are just going to be the two heads of the snake. They're kind of controlling that offense. Obviously Lamar had a great game, 87 rushing yards and a score. Uh, they had a total of 274 rushing yards, which that's crazy. Justice Hill there is gonna kind of be getting some looks there out of the backfield, some catches. So, these two teams have similar, situations where they really don't have a great number two guy or even a number one if you're Baltimore. Maybe you can make the argument that Zay Flowers and Andrews, but they need some other pieces to kind of make this offense more dynamic. And so looking at how Dallas rushes the football, it's very confusing. To me, if I was Dallas, I would kind of give Deuce Vaughn the start. He's a second man guy, and I feel like he can provide some juice there. He is a smaller guy, so I can see why that would be a concern. But I'm not ready to panic on Dallas at all. I know some people love to panic on Dallas. They get the Giants on Thursday night. I'm picking them to win on Thursday night. Spoiler alert. Then they go to Sunday night to Pittsburgh, which that's a winnable game. I feel like, um, you know, they have they have they could have Justin Fields' number there. Then they get Detroit, which they beat last year on a controversial play. However, I'm not out on Dallas. I'm not out on Baltimore. However, Baltimore has a tough game next Sunday night. I think they're home against Buffalo, so that's going to be a game to see though. But I'm not ready to panic on either of these teams yet, Justin.
Yeah, I think you're right. And they're both 1-2 now, but still in the fight with their division. So it's gonna be close. And their offenses were both clicking. Dallas's was in the fourth quarter only, but we saw it from Dak. He had a good game. Moving to the next game, the Rams upset the 49ers. Both teams were shorthanded. 49ers didn't have Debo, obviously CMC and Kittle. And then the Rams don't have Puka or Cup. So they're coming in shorthanded on both sides. And it was a major Kyron Williams game versus Jawan Jennings. If you somehow had both of them in your lineup, there's quite literally a 0% chance you lost your week. Um, Jawan Jennings, hey man, what 11 for 175 and 3 touchdowns. What a game. I'm interested what next week will look like. If he does have a good game next week, I think he's going to be a top 15 play until Debo comes back, depending on how long Debo's out. Jordan Mason had a game. He didn't get 100 yards, didn't even hit 80, had 2 catches. Not too worried about him. As long as he's a starter, he's a must start. Brock Purdy had a great game. Let me see. They play New England, as I mentioned, next week. I think that's a start. He's a starter in that game. And then on the Rams side, the only guy that really had a good game was Kyron Williams, 3 touchdowns. Bros played San Francisco only twice in his career and has 5 touchdowns in those 2 games. So he might be a guy that just does well against the 49ers. And, the Rams came back and Kyle Shanahan had another choke session. Um, but, I'm not too worried about the 49ers. I think Ayuk has a slow game. Hopefully, I mean, he had the perfect opportunity to have a good game. So there's like slight worry in my mind, but not too worried.
Yeah, Justin. With the 49ers here, it's very concerning on how they're able to kind of win football games. They won a tough one against the Giants, or not the Giants, the Jets, excuse me, and then they lose a tough one against Minnesota. And late in games they're just not good. And Kyle Shanahan once again is just choking another game, and he is just a notorious choker. I mean, as a head coach, I mean, he has the best 2 or 3 quarters as a coordinator slash head coach you'll ever see. I mean, if it's like let's win the game and be done after the third period, like it is in hockey, then I taking Kyle Shanahan day in and day out. But he's got to be one of the worst fourth quarter head coaches you'll ever see. It's almost like he just gets nervous and just I don't know what it is about him that causes that. Very concerning that last week the Rams looked absolutely awful in Arizona. That defense dominated Stafford, even though Cooper Cup and Puka were out. It's still, you still should move the ball, and it's crazy how the Rams are still able to win. It just shows you the testament of how good of a coach McVay really is. And they're always going to have battles. Those two coaches, they've known each other. They're very familiar. They take turns. It seems like every year they take turns, kind of embarrassing each other. One year it's San Francisco beating them in Monday Night Football, and then the other year it's Cooper Cup torching them up all 3 games of the year. And they kind of take turns every year. So maybe this year's the McVay year, and then maybe the year if Shanahan still has his job, it'll be the Shanahan job. And so um, with Juwan Jennings, Justin, something interesting that you got to look at here. He did have a good game week 1. I would say he had 5 catches for 5 targets, 64 yards. And obviously they were all around there, San Francisco. And then, week 2, they struggled in Minnesota, only scored 17 points. Debo led them with 100 receiving yards there. Juwan Jennings still did pretty good. He had 4 catches, 37 yards. Not it wasn't good actually, but then now that Debo's not there, he takes off. So well, my point is that I think Juwan Jennings is a start going forward there. Obviously, when Debo gets back, it's something you can bench him, but he's a must start going into next week. Garrett Wilson and Lazard scored last week against New England, so maybe Juwan Jennings is a guy that's a candidate to score as well this week too. So definitely like Juwan Jennings this week. And so it's definitely a guy you have to start. He scored 40 fantasy points this week, Justin. So definitely a guy you must start.
No, Juwan Jennings, highest score of any player on the season so far. So it's not like a guy you can just bench next week. I think you're right. He's got to be in your lineup, especially if Debo misses. Moving to the last 3 o'clock game, we had the Lions upset the Cardinals. And man, Kyler Murray and Arizona, that first drive, they looked phenomenal. They went out and scored, and I was like, man, this is going to be a fireworks kind of game. It kind of stopped after that for Arizona. I mean, it wasn't a crazy high scoring game. Detroit relied on the run. I mean, 43 rushing attempts for the Lions, and Montgomery, another big game. Jahmyr Gibbs, he had a solid game, was able to get that really interesting touchdown with the hook and ladder from Amon-Ra. So they're both involved pretty equally. I think they wanted to rely on Montgomery a little bit more because they knew how explosive Arizona's offense could be, and they just didn't want them to have the ball. And so they relied on Monty, and he's been a steal if you have him in your leagues. With Arizona, I'm not too worried. I think like they'll bounce back. The tough story is McBride left the game with a concussion, so it looks like he'll probably miss a week. But Arizona gets Washington next week, so I'd fire up, Marvin, James Conner, Kyler Murray, even like Michael Wilson next week is going to be one of the bigger sleepers for me against a really easy defense. So be ready, even though it was a tough week for Arizona. As for Detroit, I mean, JMO, he had a really bad game, only one catch, 9 yards, and a loss of 7 on a rush. I think it's worth to still start him. I'm pretty sure that they do have a bye week after this next game. They play Seattle on Monday night. And the way Seattle's offense is playing, I think it's going to be there should be a back and forth there. So I expect Jameson Williams to bounce back. Um, and unfortunately, Laporta did leave with a low ankle sprain. I think he should be able to play next week. So obviously, stay tuned for that. But I think he's going to be a start if he's in, because he was getting involved until he got injured. Like there was a clear change in the guard. Like they started targeting him more, but he did leave the game injured. So we'll see. Stay tuned on his status. And then Amon Ra, he must start. But yeah, that's kind of my regards on the game.
Yeah, Justin, this game had shootout potential, but it turned underwhelming there. Very shocked that it didn't turn out to be a shootout. But with the Cardinals, I kind of had that feeling they were going to have this week just because they were riding high from last week. They had a breakout game, a kind of like show out, kind of a last year, Kyler and Jonathan Gannon didn't start the season together, obviously because Kyler's injury. But now, they kind of getting acclimated to this offense. They had a rough week one in Buffalo, even though they could have won it. But then it was their time to show out week two, and then they kind of rode high on it. It felt like they're a little satisfied. But you got to remember, Detroit was coming off a tough loss at home to Baker Mayfield, and so they kind of wanted to prove themselves. But this is a matchup that, it sucks that they're not in the same division because I would have liked to seen a part two in Detroit. But Justin, this is a matchup that you can look into postseason time, maybe a potential wild card game. I like this matchup a lot. I think the Cardinals could make the playoffs. They could make the playoffs as a wild card. Detroit could win the division still, even though that division is now very tough and tough for grabs as well. But with Laporta, he's got hurt. Hopefully, he doesn't miss much time. It's good to see, Monron St. Brown score a touchdown, Marvin Harrison score a touchdown. With Trey McBride being out possibly next week, I do like Michael Wilson, even though he's a wide receiver, to get some of that volume, give him some of those targets. Michael Wilson, it's Michael Wilson, right?
Correct.
I feel like he's a guy that's going to be, being picked up there in the next couple weeks. He's going to be a highly valued waiver wire pickup, a guy that Kyler Murray's going to be going to, Justin, and it's going to boost Kyler Murray's stock as well because now you'll have Marvin Harrison, Trey McBride, and Wilson to throw it to. And so the Cardinals are still, trending in the right direction. They play Washington, who that's going to be another shootout. So 3 straight home games for Arizona there. Um, Detroit, they have a Monday night against Seattle. I do like Jared Goff and Amon-Ra and Gibbs to have a great Monday night game. They're in Detroit. I feel like that defense can get to Geno pretty quickly there, and so I like Detroit to probably possibly go into 3-1. Not any spoilers for our predictions that we'll post later this week, Justin, but these two teams they're going to be very interesting to watch all season long. So even though Arizona lost, I still like them this season. Their offense is still not, as long as you have Kyler Murray leading the way, they still should be a great team.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think they'll bounce back pretty easily next week. And a shootout. Hopefully they get in that shootout because it was fun. I was super hyped watching them in week 2 against the Rams. They were firing all cylinders. Moving to the last game, Sunday Night Football, the Chiefs win a close one again against Atlanta. Atlanta had a chance to really win the game on that last drive, and on 4th and 1, they get stopped. Looking at the box score, I mean, Bijan didn't have a great game on the ground, 16 for 31, so under 2 yards a carry. Did get in the end zone, but not like a crazy great game for Bijan. I think it's just more of a testament to how good the Chiefs' defense is, especially against the run. And then Drake London, he had a good game, so maybe he's becoming more of a consistent piece in this offense. And then on the Kansas City side, I mean, Rashee Rice, is he going to be a top 5 wide receiver at the end of the year? I mean, he is killing it. 12 catches, 110 and a touchdown. Arguably, maybe is the steal of the draft thus far, especially at the wide receiver position. Travis Kelce, underwhelming game again. And I don't know, man. I mean, Mahomes came out and said that he's getting double covered every game, every snap, but like I think there's something going wrong there, just like maybe age or mindset. I don't know. Maybe his brother leaving the NFL's, dropped off some drive. I don't know, but it hasn't looked good for Kelsey, and I don't expect it to. I don't obviously I don't expect him to touch tight end one this season, but I expected to get somewhat back on track, hopefully in the next week or two. And last bit of it, this running back room, Carson Steele led the way, 17 carries, 72 yards, which is interesting. He was definitely the clear leader, and now they play the Chargers, who have been pretty good on defense. So I'm still probably not super excited about that rushing attack. But you got to start Rashee Rice. You got to throw in Kelsey. You got to throw in Mahomes next week. And with Atlanta, you got to start Drake London, obviously Bijan. Um, and you got to start Kyle Pitts. He almost had a touchdown, and not it wasn't called for PI. It should have been. And then there was one I think he got on the 1 yard line and he got tackled. So Kyle Pitts, you still need to keep in your line.
Yeah, Justin, with this matchup, one of the things that just brought out to me is, Rasheed Rice is the best pass catcher that Kansas City has. I'm a little surprised that they're not getting Xavier Worthy involved at all. He had a great week one with only like 3 touches. In the past 2 weeks, he's just a guy there. And I started Xavier Worthy in our main league, and it's not looking so pretty there. Hopefully, he's a guy that I was expecting them to for them to use him like a Debo, kind of have some Debo like packages where he's in the backfield, he's getting some handoffs, and so not really involved with him at all. He only had 5 touches there. He only had 2 catches with 3 rushes. I expected more packages now that Pacheco's out. Uh, it seemed that they kind of favored more Samaje Perine, and so it's going to be very interesting to see how this Chiefs offense kind of develops. Patrick Mahomes hasn't scored 20 fantasy points all season long. He has looked like a quarterback three as far as fantasy. I don't know if they're waiting for a shootout for him to kind of turn out. But just they win games now by their defense. I remember when Patrick Mahomes, his first year as a starter, led them to the AFC Championship, and he won an MVP that year. They were one of the worst defenses there. Obviously, that was before they called up Steve Spagnuolo there to become their defensive coordinator. When now has led them to 3 Super Bowls. Um, so they're going to be kind of relying on their defense to win them games. And Patrick Mahomes is just going to fill the gaps on whatever's needed. He's not going to be too fancy, too flashy there. He'll just do just enough to win football games. Looking at Atlanta there, I kind of predicted Kirk to struggle against this. These are defenses that Kirk kind of struggles on, especially on a primetime game. It was such a Kirk Cousins thing. So they only scored 17 points there and struggle against this Kansas City defense. But that's going to be the story for Kansas City all year. They're going to be winning games through their defense. That's how they won the Super Bowl. You can make the argument, limiting San Francisco just to that field goal in overtime, then leading Mahomes and stopping, Purdy in that offense multiple times, even before the end of regulation there in that Super Bowl. So that's kind of the story into this game. They stopped Lamar Jackson in the final play of the game, week one. Week two, they stopped Joe Burrow just enough for them to get a game-winning field goal, and here you go right here. They stopped Kirk Cousins in the last drive of that fourth quarter, and that was how they won it. So next week, I expect their defense to get them another victory. If Justin Herbert were to miss, fire up that Chiefs defense. And so that's kind of the testament of the Chiefs. They're going to be defense now. Obviously, they have the best quarterback and coach in the league, but now they have one of the best defenses along with Pittsburgh. And so, this is, Chiefs are going to be kind of a team that I mentioned they're looking to be 17-0. So, definitely a team to look out for, or definitely a team to fear all year.
No, they're looking great, and I think they're going to continue to roll. Especially if Herbert misses, that should be an easy W. Then they get the Saints at home, W. They play at 49ers. That'll be interesting. But they got some games down the line that are kind of tough, but the Chiefs are the Chiefs, man. I'm just really, I mean, just for fantasy or just for like football's sake, I want to see a big Mahomes game,
Yeah.
see him just toss the rock, but we literally haven't seen it, and it feels like a season and a half almost. Like, just that, vintage 300 yards, 4 touchdown game. But I'm not sure we're going to get that. That's not kind of the identity of the Chiefs anymore. But they're winning games, so they're going to do what they're going to do. But yeah, so that wraps up the fantasy reactions episodes part 1 and part 2. They both ran a little long, but hey, that means more content for you guys. But yeah, thanks Dween Nation for listening. My brother Genoa, hey, we are friends and brothers no longer until Monday, after Monday night games in our big league. We are going head to head, and we're seeing each other this weekend. We're going to a football game in Dallas, so excited for that. But still great talking to you, man. We got one more episode, waiver show, so stay tuned. And Jano, send us out.
Yo, Dween Nation, we're wrapping up week 3. It's crazy. We're now heading to week 4. So, if you guys need any help, don't feel hesitant to hit us up here at Doing Sports. We love fantasy. We really just live through fantasy. Justin and I, we're in tons and tons of leagues.
That's right.
And so thanks for watching, you guys. It was a crazy week 3. I hope it's crazier in week 4. Obviously, Justin and I will be facing off in fantasy, so that'll be there will be some smack talk. Nah, not much, but anyways, Dewey Nation, we love you guys. Thanks for watching, and as always,
Peace.